The final round of the regular season in the URC, and there's still so much left to be decided. My name is Mark, let's talk rugby. Round 18 of the URC, final round of the regular season, and this has been one of the most exciting URC seasons that we've had thus far, and I think it's fitting that it's ending the way it is as well. We have the issues at the bottom of the table, or the bottom of the playoff spots. You got 5 teams there. 4 of them are going to qualify for the playoffs, but obviously one of them's going to miss out. You have 3 teams vying for that top spot as well, or at least a top 2 spot to get home advantage through quarterfinal and possible semi-final as well. So plenty to play for this weekend. And looking at the fixtures as well, nothing is kind of guaranteed either. Most of the teams who are looking for a win or a bonus point win that they need this weekend have fixtures where they're not guaranteed anything. They're playing against mostly other teams who have something to play for as well, and that just makes it more difficult. So as usual, what we're going to do is go down through the fixtures for the weekend, and we'll talk about where, especially the teams who are involved in those kind of like the top 9 teams, where they are, whether they've already qualified for the playoffs, and potentially where they could finish in the table as well. And then we'll talk about as well the form of the teams and make a prediction. So we're going to start on Friday night. So we have 3 games on Friday night. So it's going to be a busy night there. And, we have 2 massive games, both at the top of the table and in that fight for those remaining spots in the race to the 8. And then we have another one that has a massive impact on that race to the 8 as well. So already going to be, weekend's going to start with a bang. And we start with the team whose jersey I'm wearing now, Cardiff Rugby versus DHL Stormers. It's a 7:45 kickoff. That's Ireland UK time. So check your local listings. It's at Cardiff Arms Park. And this is a massive, massive game for both of these teams, because you have Cardiff, the home team, currently in 7th place, 1 point ahead of Connacht. They know if somehow they can get a win, a bonus point win, they're guaranteed a place in the playoffs, and they're guaranteed a place in the Champions Cup for next season, because they won't, if they get a bonus point win at least, they won't finish any lower than their current place of 7th. And depending on whether Ultster make the playoffs or not, 8th place is not guaranteed to get you into the Champions Cup, because Ulster may, possibly come win the Challenge Cup and qualify that way. So massive game for them. It's a big ask, against DHL Stormers, who 2nd in the league, 1 point behind Glasgow. They're obviously hoping Ulster do them a favour. If they can get it done in Cardiff, then they're going to be almost certainly the number 1 seeds going into the playoffs. The only, I'm pretty sure whether they win, whether it's a bonus point or not, I'm pretty sure they will be number 1 seeds if Glasgow don't win their game, because the other team that's involved there, Leinster, even if Leinster could catch up a point. So Stormers win with a 4-point win, Leinster get a 5-point win, Stormers would still be top, because points difference is massive difference between those 2 teams. So, Stormers effectively have an extra point on them. So that's what Stormers will be looking for. Obviously, they got to do their own part first. They got to get that win against Cardiff, and then later on worry about, what Ulster can do against Glasgow. But yeah, given that it means, you got two teams who absolutely need to win, but only one of them is going to win. But if you look at Stormers last week, nobody won against Ulster. They both drew. So there's still the possibility of that on the table as well. So starting off the weekend with a very interesting game. And, I've said it already, you've got Cardiff down there in that group of five. So you're speaking basically from the Lions, Munster, Cardiff, Ulster and Connacht. 4 of those teams are going to qualify. 3 of them are Irish. So normally I would be absolutely cheering for the Irish teams to qualify, and I probably will be cheering for them all to win their games because I can't not support the Irish teams. But at the same time, look at those other 2 teams in that group. You got the Lions, who, never qualified for playoffs before. Absolutely want that to happen for them because, again, I think it's better for the URC to have more teams, being able to qualify for playoffs, get into Champions Cup, and just grow, especially in South Africa. I think just grow that love of those European competitions, especially the Champions Cup down there. And let's see how the Lions go in that. So, I want the Lions to qualify, but also Cardiff. Cardiff don't make it, then we don't have a Welsh team in the playoffs or in the Champions Cup either. And, we'd like that to happen. We saw, Ospreys missed out a couple of seasons ago, right? Where they finished 8th, and it was the Sharks, I think. Yeah, the Sharks had won the Challenge Cup, so therefore they qualified for the Champions Cup instead of them. And then from last year, Scarlets qualified in 8th as well, but they did go to the Champions Cup. Weren't brilliant, but at the same time, they got to a position where they could have, in the final game, could have qualified for the knockout stages as well of that competition. So, didn't completely embarrass themselves in it. And we want these Welsh teams, or at least I do. I want these Welsh teams to do well because we all know how, how terribly run Welsh rugby is at the moment. And any kind of good news story for them, I think, would be fantastic. So, it puts me in a quandary in terms of I'm looking at those 5 teams and I want all 5 teams to qualify, and I know only 4 of them can do it. So it's kind of a tough one. But let's have a look at the form of these teams and let's make predictions. So starting with Cardiff, they've won 3 of the last 7 games. And in that sequence, they lost to Ulster, they beat Leinster, lost to the Bulls, and then to the Sharks. Then they beat Scarlets, they beat Ospreys, and then they lost to Glasgow last week by 23 points. And that defeat against Glasgow, for me, a little bit worrying just because they were in a very similar position to the Stormers in that they were away from home. They knew they needed to get something to stay, really stay in that fight. The Stormers were able to do it, and Cardiff weren't. And Cardiff were a bit kind of powder puff against a Glasgow team who hadn't been, performing brilliantly in recent rounds. So, there certainly would have been a little bit of vulnerability there with Glasgow. Now, Glasgow's performance was brilliant. The kind of real return to form for them. But at the same time, I would have liked to see a little bit more fight from Cardiff in that game. Then Stormers, they've won 4 of the last 7, and then they drew last time out as well. So lost to the Lions, then 3 wins on the bounce against the Bulls, Dragons, and then Edinburgh. Then a loss against Connacht, win against Glasgow, and then they drew against Ulster to keep themselves in contention for top spot. Because it looked like, right to death, that game against Ulster, that they were pretty much out of the running because they would have been, still would have had a chance because they would have been on, 57 points instead of 59. So still would have had some chance of qualification for getting top spot, or even at least getting top 2. But it would have been a bit more difficult because both Glasgow and Leinster would have been ahead of them on points, and therefore they're not just looking for a favour from one team, they're looking for a favour from 2 teams to be at the top of the table. So now it's not quite all in their own hands, but at least, they only need a favour on one game for them to potentially finish in top spot. So certainly a lot better than it would have been had they not got, that try right to death. Yes, it was a penalty try, but, anyone who argues that that wasn't a penalty try, completely one-eyed. So I wouldn't take any notice of them. But it leaves this poised very interestingly. Again, both teams looking for that win, hoping for more fight from Cardiff, honestly, in this game. But the fact that Stormers are vying for that top spot, I think they'll have a little bit more, because, again, last week both teams went away from home. One of them really did fight in the game, the other didn't. Now, as I said, Cardiff, definitely going to be a better performance at home, but I think there's going to be a period where Cardiff are going to maybe drop off a little bit in intensity, and I think that's where Stormers are going to win it. It might be, I'm thinking it's going to be somewhere, between 50 and 70 minutes in the game, where maybe Stormers will be in the ascendancy and they'll get what they need to win the game. It might be another one where, like Ulster, goes right down to the death for either a draw or a win from either team as well. So that'd be interesting. It'd be a very exciting game, but it was. But I very rarely do this. I'm gonna back against a team whose jersey I'm wearing. I'm again torn on this because I like the Stormers, but I'd love to see Cardiff win. But in terms of prediction, I'm going to go with my head and I'm going to say a Stormers win. But again, I'm absolutely going to be rooting for Cardiff in that one. And it's nothing to do with wanting Glasgow or Leinster to top the table. It's just about, I'd love to see a Welsh team in the playoffs, even if it is at the expense of an Irish team. Okay, so prediction there, as I said, is Stormers to win. Next then, we have another massive game, Ulster versus Glasgow Warriors, 7:45 kickoff as well at the Days Stadium. So pretty much a mirror of the game we just talked about. A team down there, just about in the playoff spots, needing a win to stay in that, and a team near the top, this team at the top of the table, looking to win to secure number 1 spot. And these two teams have basically swapped oppositions from last weekend, because Ulster played Stormers and Cardiff played Glasgow. So going to be interesting to see how things go compared to last week, given that they have actually swapped around. So can Ulster do a better job against Glasgow than Cardiff did? Or can Cardiff produce the type of performance that they did that made that win against Cardiff look so easy for them? So a lot of kind of interesting stuff there. And again, it's a case of, Ulster, pretty sure Ulster absolutely need a win because they are the most vulnerable team in 8th place to get into the playoffs. Now, again, for Champions Cup, they do have another route, possible route at least, with the Challenge Cup. They could qualify through that, and obviously then 8th spot would of the URC would drop down to the Challenge Cup for next year. But I think they prefer to be to qualify from the URC, because then they're in the playoffs as well, and they have those, once you're in the playoffs, you have the possibility of lifting that trophy as well. So but yeah, I think they absolutely need a win to make it into the playoffs. Glasgow definitely need a win to stay top of the table, because it's hard to see both Stormers and Leinster losing. So and I said it previously as well, that I felt that the team who was going to finish top of the table would be the team that would win the last two games. Now, Stormers might actually draw and win the last two games, but certainly, the winner is not going to lose one of the last two games at least. So Glasgow know they absolutely have to win to stay top of the table, and have that chance. And it's interesting as well because they're going to the Afterday, and I read that if Glasgow make it to the final, like as number one seed, so therefore it being a home final, they're actually looking into the possibility of using the Afterday as their quote unquote home ground, because like Scotstoun, Scotstoun, I think Murrayfield, where else then, like Celtic's ground, none of those are available for them to use on the weekend that the URC final would be on. I think is Scotstoun being used for the, what's it called? I can't remember it. Commonwealth Games, I think, right? And then is there a concert on or something in one of the grounds? And so basically none of those grounds are available. The Rangers ground apparently is the wrong size to be used for rugby, so can't use that either. Yeah, so they're looking into the possibility of actually using the Afterday, so that would be interesting. They win at the Afterday in order to give themselves a chance, then come back to the Afterday to be the home team in the final as well. So that's a little kind of undercurrent in the game too. Both teams, you would say, at this point, certainly not the best form they've been in through the season, because both teams have been on really nice runs. Ulster used to be up there, looked like they were maybe going to challenge for top two, top three, obviously fallen away completely from that. Glasgow had their own blip, but has still managed to stay top of the table. But let's look at their last seven. So Ulster 1-2 and a draw in the last seven, and Glasgow won 4 of their last 7 as well. So Ulster's in their sequence, they lost to Ospreys, then a win against Edinburgh, lost against Connacht, they win against Zebre, then they lost against Leinster, lost against Munster, and then that draw against Stormers last weekend when they thought they had the win secured in the final minute of the game. Glasgow then, in their sequence, win against Munster, lost against Connacht, win against Leinster, win against Benetton, looking like they're going great. Then they go down to South Africa, heavily beaten by 42 points by the Lions, and then heavily beaten by 36 points by Stormers. And then they bounce back down with that win against Cardiff at home last week that has still put them in pole position to be number one seeds, because they know bonus point win in this game and they're number one seeds. Nobody else can catch them. If they get a win, then it depends on what happens with the Stormers. Like Leinster can't catch them if Glasgow get any kind of win against Ulster. They'll only have to just worry about what's happening in the Stormers game. So that certainly will be of interest, just in terms of, who's going to finish top. Now, at the minute, Stormers have a better points difference than Glasgow. So, it's hard to see, because the scenario of the two teams finishing on the same points would be Glasgow win their game, but don't get a bonus point, and Stormers win their game with a bonus point. And you would imagine that if Glasgow haven't gotten a bonus point out of their game, then their winning margin wouldn't be enough to make up the 30 points difference between themselves and the Stormers. Obviously, Stormers could score 4 tries and concede 4 tries and only win by a point or two, but Glasgow then would still have to win by 30-something points and not score 4 tries. So that's kind of, I think, unrealistic scenario for that to happen there. So I think for Glasgow, really, if Stormers win their game with a bonus point, then Glasgow also have to win their game with a bonus point. So that's kind of the situation they're in at the minute. This is a really tough one to call between these two teams. Again, I've got kind of loyalty to Ulster because they're an Irish team. Glasgow, a team I really admire as well. And it's another head versus heart one. And I went with my head in the Cardiff Stormers game, but I think I'm going to go with my heart with this one. I think Ulster, will produce something. I don't think they're going to be thinking about resting players for the Challenge Cup final. I think it's going to be, pretty much a full team that they put out for that game as well. So I'm going to go for an Ulster win, but I think Glasgow will probably get 2 bonus points out of it. And, that probably will be enough. Well, actually, it's going to be close, right? If they only get 2 bonus points, it mightn't be enough to secure a top 2 spot for them, actually. Just looking at the table, because Leinster are 4 points behind, so they would need to get, if they went to Leinster 2 points behind, sorry, it would put Leinster 4 points behind, is what I meant. And Leinster could get 5 points from their game and pip them. So, yeah, as I said, it's so tight in all those positions. But I'm going to go for an Ulster win in that one. But again, it should be an absolutely fantastic game. And then the third game on Friday night is where, again, everything could be decided for the top 8, because you got Edinburgh versus Connacht, 7:45 kickoff as well at the Hive Stadium. So another absolutely massive game for Connacht, because they're the team that's threatening those 4 teams above them. If they can win, especially win with a bonus point, then all of those other teams are on notice in terms of qualifying for the playoffs. Any other team that's in that position knows that a defeat and a Connacht win means that they're probably not going to make the playoffs. So, but if Connacht lose the game, then all of those teams automatically qualify, because Connacht, even if I would imagine there is a scenario like Connacht get maybe 2 losing bonus points, and technically teams are under threat to qualify. But, I'm expecting, the 2 teams that would be under threat really are Cardiff and Ulster. But I'm expecting both of those to get, some kind of bonus point out of their games as well. Obviously, Cardiff didn't get one last week, so it is possible. It's possible for both of them, and even maybe Munster as well. But I do think maybe a Connacht defeat would probably signal that the other teams above them will qualify. It'd just be weird for a team, honestly, to qualify, on the back of a loss. In terms of being outside the top 8 and getting in, obviously teams above them may actually lose as well and qualify. But I mean, for a team to come from outside the playoffs with a loss would be very, very strange. But this one, you got, Edinburgh, who kind of like a bit weird, because season is over and the form is picked up. Like they've had nothing to play for weeks, and they put one of their best runs together. They are getting players back. We saw Duhan van der Merwe score a couple of tries last week as well. But yeah, they've had nothing to play for ages, and suddenly now it's all, we remembered how to play. Connacht, though, one of the form teams in the entire league. They've won 6 of their last 7 games, and only the Lions are at that same level at the minute, I think. No, the Bulls are the other team as well. Yeah, so there's three of them still with 6 wins in the last 7. So Connacht really have been on a charge, but they basically been charging up to catch that pack of teams, but they still haven't been able to get above any of them, at the end of a round. So this is obviously the last chance for everyone, but really their last chance, and they've got to keep that run going again. If they've got any chance at all of qualifying, but they're against an Edinburgh team who, as I said, are on one of their best runs of the season. So it's not going to be easy pickings for Connacht, because normally you think, oh, they're playing against a team who have nothing to play for, end of season. Obviously, they're going to win, and that's going to put massive pressure on everyone else. But when you have a team like Edinburgh, they've won 3 on the bounce. They'll want to keep that going, and it's their last home game of the season as well. We've seen teams like Benetton against Leinster get massive bounces from just the whole idea that it's the last home game of the season as well. So a lot of things may be going against Connacht in terms of who their opposition are for this week. But if you're gonna qualify for the playoffs, then you've got to be beating teams, whoever it is put up against you, and Connacht would have known this anyway. But it's kind of interesting as well that you've got the two teams I've always compared to each other, because since the URC started, and before that as well, they've been the two really inconsistent teams in the URC. They've been the teams that have yo-yoed up and down the league. They've yo-yoed up and down in terms of their performance within games as well. Connacht seem to have sorted that out. Edinburgh might be on the road to sorting that out as well. So that's kind of interesting to see the turnaround in both teams recently. But Edinburgh, they've won 4 of their last 7. And compared to a lot of teams in the league, that easily puts them in the top half of the teams in terms of form over the last 7 games. But again, they're against Connacht, who've won 6 of the last 7, and they're along with Bulls and the Lions, they're there at the top of the recent form. But Edinburgh, in their sequence, win against the Scarlets, then 3 defeats on the bounce. That was against Ultster, then against the Lions, and against the Stormers. Then 3 wins on the bounce: Zebre, Sharks, and then Dragons. And in Connacht, if we look at their sequence, so wins against Glasgow, Scarlets, Ulster, Ospreys, Stormers, loss against the Lions, and then a win against Munster as well. So, some big wins in there for Connacht. You have that win down to South Africa against the Stormers. They also had, a win against Glasgow, who were top of the table at the time and still are at the minute, and then breaking that duck as well in terms of not having won a Interpro and Irish Derby in over 2 years, and then they win 2 in advance. They beat Ulster, and then they beat Munster as well. So, on a bit of a run in the Irish Derbies too. So, really big turnaround for Connacht, and the players really are starting to perform. And I talked about in the review of the game against Munster as well. You look at that game, both teams looking to secure their place in the playoffs, and it was only Connacht that looked like they actually had something to play for. Munster at times were pretty abject in that game. So Connacht really are coming with a fire in their belly for this, and because of that, I think they're going to be able to come up with the win in this one. They might have to win a little bit ugly. They might have to do it late on in the game, but I think just that desire will get them over the line to a win. So I'm going to predict a Connacht win in that one. So now on to the Saturday games, and we start with a couple of maybe easier to predict games, let's say. So we have Hollywoodbets Sharks versus Zebre Parma. This is a 12:45 kickoff. It's at Hollywoodbets Kings Park. And yeah, you've got two teams at the moment who are, out of any contention for anything. You've got the Sharks, who are in 10th place, but they're 8 points behind Connacht, so they're not going to finish any higher. They may finish lower because you have Ospreys and Edinburgh, who both could overtake them. But they're playing against Zebre, who are bottom of the league, 10 points adrift of Dragons, so they know they're going to finish bottom of the league as well. Zebre, they did, they did produce some performances recently that kind of said, okay, there's a bit more fight there, but they weren't able to get results. But last game of the season away from home, heavy defeat last week against the Bulls. For me, it's difficult to see Zebre produce the performance, honestly, in this game. But in terms of recent form, Sharks have won 3 of the last 7. Zebre have not won any of the last 7. They haven't won any of their last 15 games. So won the first 2 games in the URC, and they've had 15 on the bounce then, where they've lost. So, they would love to finish the season with a win. But let's have a look at the sequences before we make a prediction that I think you can kind of guess. But the Sharks lost against the Lions, then the Bulls, then wins against Munster and Cardiff, lost against Ospreys, lost against Edinburgh, and then a win against Benetton last week. Zebre, in their sequence, lost against Connacht, Munster, Scarlets, Ultster, Edinburgh, Dragons, and then the Bulls last week. And the one thing about Zebre last week, they lost by 35 points, but I think they scored 3 tries. So that's at least something for them. And that's maybe where they're looking at in this game as well. It's not necessarily winning it, but can they get a few tries on the board? Maybe even get a try bonus point out of the game. I think that would be some kind of progress for them. But I think that's probably where, their ambition lies. Obviously, they're not going to tell you that. Every team goes out to try and win every game that they play. But, you got to be a little pragmatic with stuff like this as well. And in this one, I'm predicting a Sharks win. Okay, next time we have Vodacom Bulls versus Benetton. It's a 3 o'clock kickoff, and it's at Loftus Versfeld. Again, all times are in the UK time, so check your local listings so you don't miss anything. And we have the Bulls, who at the moment in 4th place in the league, potentially could finish as high as 2nd in the league, depending on obviously other results. And again, kind of like Glasgow versus the Stormers, they have like 30 odd points to make up on them. But the scenario of the two teams finishing on the same number of points is more favourable, let's say, to the Bulls, because it would mean Bulls would win with a bonus point and Stormers would get nothing out of their game. So it means that Stormers would lose by more than 7 points, right? Not get any try bonus point either. So that's 7 of those 30 odd at least for the Bulls to make up. And then the Bulls will be winning with a bonus point. And again, you can win with a bonus point and win by a point. But it's more likely if you're winning with a bonus point, you're winning by maybe, somewhere between 15 and, 30, somewhere in that normally, maybe more, maybe sometimes less. Yeah. But that's kind of your sweet spot. Somewhere maybe in the 20s, you're going to be winning by. So it's going to be close, I think. If we get the scenario of Bulls winning with a bonus point, Stormers getting nothing out of their game against Cardiff. That's honestly difficult to see. But stranger things have happened in rugby. It's the reason why the games get played, and we don't just go, oh well, Stormers definitely going to win that, so just give them 5 points. Cardiff again playing for something. could produce one of their best performances of the season and be going into the playoffs with a massive G up. And then obviously on the back of that, the Bulls may benefit as well. So given that, there's hope there for the Bulls to, as I said, to finish as high as second. They could potentially finish as low as eighth in the standings. Connacht can finish on the same number of points, match points as them, but they can't overtake them because there's just a massive points difference between them. But I don't think that's going to be a worry, honestly. Last game of the season at home against a Benetton team who, didn't look great last week either. And Bulls have won 6 of the last 7 games. So in that sequence for Bulls, they beat the Sharks. The one loss was against the Stormers. Then they beat Cardiff, Munster, Dragons, Scarlets, and then Zebre. And Benetton in their run, 2 wins, 2 draws in the last 7. So drew against the Scarlets and then the Dragons. Then they beat Ospreys, lost against Glasgow, lost against Munster. They beat Leinster, and then they lost against the Sharks by 39 points last week. And I think it's going to be something similar this week as well for them. And prediction here again, pretty easy for you to predict what I'm going to predict, as it were. Bulls win with a bonus point, so they're going to finish, top 4, I think, definitely. And then depending on other results, they could, as I said, could finish high second. I think realistically, they're looking at potentially a slip up for Leinster to finish third, rather than finishing second ahead of Stormers. But I'm going to go for a Bulls win in that one. Next game then is that Leinster game, Leinster versus Ospreys. It is a 5:15 kickoff at the Aviva Stadium. And we got, Leinster playing a team who have nothing to play for, but they had that against Benetton a few weeks ago. But it was Benetton's last home game of the season, and Leinster got caught on the hop. Now, against Ospreys' last game of the season, is the same thing going to happen to them again? Leinster a minute in third place, potentially could finish in as number 1 seeds, but for them to do that, both Glasgow and Stormers would have to lose their game. So that's not a very likely scenario. Honestly, the most likely scenario for Leinster is maybe finishing top 2. And that most likely scenario would be Leinster win their game and Glasgow lose against Ulster. So of the scenarios for Leinster to finish in the top 2, I think that's the more likely of those, but I don't think it's more likely to happen. I think it's more likely that Glasgow and Stormers are going to be the top 2 than Leinster break into there, honestly. But they've got the chance. They'll obviously know by then, by the time their game kicks off, because Glasgow and Stormers are playing on Friday. So they'll know whether they've even got a chance of finishing in the top 2, and they'll know what they need out of the game. But whether they can break into the top 2 or not, they will also have the fact that, both the Bulls and the Lions could push them out of the top 4. So they know they absolutely need a win in this game. And again, kind of like Ulster, can't really be resting players ahead of the Champions Cup final. I don't think it's going to be a full strength Leinster team, but I think a lot of the players that didn't play last weekend, in that win against the Lions, are going to be playing this weekend. So you're going to see the likes of Kelleher, I think, like Doris van der Vlier, those kind of guys involved. Harry Byrne, was he? Trying to think last week. I think Harry Byrne probably involved as well. James Gibson Park, plenty of the guys coming through there as well. So it's going to be a fairly strong Leinster team. I don't think it's going to be like everyone, because they seem to have decided to kind of do this thing of some players will play the second last game and some players will play the last game. And some will be maybe, you start one game, you're on the bench for the next one, or you're on the bench for the first one, now you're starting the next one. I don't think we'll see like a full strength, but it should be a pretty strong team. It doesn't mean they're guaranteed to win against Ospreys though, because of the problems, that we talked at length about for Leinster recently. But, and also just to highlight those problems they've had recently, both these teams have exactly the same form, won 4 of the last 7 games. Where, generally coming into this time of the season, you would expect, a Leinster team who are up near the top of the table playing an Ospreys team who have been, for a couple of weeks now, eliminated from the race to the 8th. You would expect Leinster to have a better form, but they don't. So Leinster's form in the last 7, beat Edinburgh, then back-to-back losses against Cardiff and in Glasgow. Then they beat Scarlets. They beat Ulster, looking like they're back on track. And then they have that loss away to Benetton. Bounced back last time with that win against the Lions, but still looked a bit disjointed on seeing that game. Then Ospreys, so they start off with wins against the Dragons and in Ulster, then loss against Benetton, loss against Connacht. They beat the Sharks. They lost against Cardiff, and then that win against the Scarlets, and that was a tough game. It was kind of back and forth in the game, but Ospreys were able to come out on top in that one. So, again, that kind of thing of, if it's close going down the stretch, is that going to stand to them against a Leinster team who've wobbled recently? So I think if Leinster are going to win this one, they've got to get themselves in a position where going into those last 20 minutes that they've got the cushion of a couple of scores rather than it being a tight game. They don't need another tight finish to one of their league games, honestly. And in this one, again, a Leinster fan, and I'm going to back Leinster for that one, but I think Ospreys are going to make it very difficult for Leinster. Okay, so on to the next one then, and it's Scarlets versus Dragons. It's a 5:15 kickoff, so at the same time as Leinster Ospreys in the Parky Scarlets. So we have the final Welsh derby of the season. Up until recently, Scarlets, were kind of, they were below Dragons, right, in the league. I think, earlier on in the season, not up until recently, early on in the season, they were below Dragons in the league. And now the two are kind of neck and neck. And, not only is it the last Welsh derby of the season, but the loser of this game will be the bottom Welsh team in the URC as well. So neither of the teams want that to happen. Dragons obviously, have had their struggles in recent years in the URC as well, finishing bottom of the table. They'll want, to finish higher up, but the prospect of finishing above another Welsh region as well, I think, is massive incentive for them. But Scarlets, they've shown recently, they got that little bit of dog back in them. It hasn't been getting them results, but it has been getting them close, losing bonus points, etc. And now, last home game of the season for them as well. They'll want to put on a show and finish with a win, with a bang. Dragons have been, in decent, certainly playing form recently. They had a good run in Europe as well. You can see that they're much more confident than they've been, at this stage of the season in any of the other, recent seasons as well. So I think this is going to be a massive game. And again, I think if we're predicting a draw this week, this will be the game that I pick. Now, I'm not going to predict a draw because I never do. But yeah, I think the most likely game to be drawn this weekend will probably be this one. So Scarlets, 1 win in the last 7. So lost against Edinburgh and then Connacht. Then the 1 win against Zebre. Then the loss against Leinster. But really good performance in that game against Leinster. Then an hour defeat to Cardiff. An hour defeat to the Bulls. And an hour defeat to Ospreys, getting losing bonus points in all of those games. Dragons then, they've won 1 and drawn 1 over the last 7. So narrow loss to Ospreys, then a draw against Benetton. A narrow loss to Stormers, almost got a losing bonus point in that one. Lost to the Lions. They lost heavily to the Bulls. Win against Zebre, 31 points to 30, I think that one was. Could have gone either way, but Dragons crucially come out with the win in that one. And then an hour defeat to Edinburgh by 9 points. Where, they were in a position in the Edinburgh game where it looked like they might actually come out with a win because Edinburgh had a man in the bin. Dragons really pressing. It was a tight score at the time. If Dragons scored the next try, they would have been leading going down the stretch. But Duhan van der Merwe turned up and sealed the win for Edinburgh. But again, tight result there. So this one I think is going to be tight. And again, if I was predicting a draw, I certainly would predict it in this one. But I'm going to go for Scarlets to just about pip them. Okay, so on to the final game of the weekend, the final game of the regular season. It's Munster versus the Fidelity Secure Drive Lions. It's a 7:45 kickoff, and it's in Thomond Park. So last game of the season for Munster in Thomond Park. Thomond Park, not the fortress that it used to be, but still, Munster at home. They are against a rival team for the race to the 8 now. I don't think the Lions are going to miss out on the top 8, but still, Lions are in 5th, Munster in 6th. So Munster know a win and they finish above the Lions, but also secure the place in the playoffs and secure Champions Cup rugby for next season as well. So lots on the on the line for Munster. Lions, I do think that, obviously of the teams that could mathematically miss out on the playoffs, that they're the most secure because they basically just need a point out of this game and to qualify. Now, there is an issue with the whole thinking of, like in rugby, that you only need a point out of a game to qualify. Like, they do have their points difference is 40 better than Connacht. So you can't really see a 40-point swing with the two teams finishing on the same amount of points, because a 40-point swing, first of all, would mean a big win for Connacht, but also a sizable loss for the Lions. And if the Lions are losing by a sizable margin, i.e. more than 7 points, they're probably not getting a losing bonus point out of the game, and more than likely they're probably not getting a try bonus point out of the game either. So therefore, the two teams wouldn't finish on the same amount of points. The Lions would stay on 53 and Connacht would move to 54. So it's an unlikely scenario again that these two teams finish on the same number of match points. So I do think for the Lions that if they can get a bonus point out of the game, given the points difference, kind of makes it an extra point for them, that they'll be safe because they'll be on 54. Connacht can only get to a maximum of 54. And if Connacht haven't then won by 40 points, they're probably not finishing above the Lions. So Lions know that a point in this game should be enough to qualify them for the playoffs, but you don't go into games most weeks at least, looking to try and get a losing bonus point. Because first of all, if you're looking to get a losing bonus point, you think you're good enough to finish within 7 of the opposition, then you must also believe that you're good enough to win the game as well. So they'll be aiming for a win. And a win obviously guarantees them a top 8 finish. They will finish 5th or above and possibly in the top 4 if one of those teams above them slip up. They can catch either the Bulls or Leinster above them as well. Leinster have like a 25 points difference on them, but if Leinster are losing their game and the Lions are winning their game, 25 points is a bit more manageable to catch up than the 40-point gap between themselves and Connacht. So they can potentially, Leinster get nothing out of their game against Ospreys, Lions win with a bonus point. Potentially they could overtake them. The Bulls, a bit more straightforward because only a point between the two teams. So Lions basically have to get 2 more match points than the Bulls because the Bulls have a far superior points difference. So there's, they're not going to, again, another one of these where if they both finish on the same amount of match points, the Bulls will definitely finish higher up the table. So they basically got to get 2 more match points than the Bulls, which means pretty much that the Bulls have to lose because there's no scenario where both teams win and the Lions get 2 more match points than them. It's obviously either going to be 4 points or 5 points for a win for either team. So they've got to hope that the Bulls lose, but it's not likely again for the Bulls to lose. So for the Lions, when you're looking at all of that, it means that realistically, the highest they can finish, I think, is 4th place with Leinster losing to Ospreys without a bonus, any kind of bonus point, and them getting a bonus point themselves and making up that 25-point difference. But the more likely scenario is them finishing in 5th place, if they win. So that's pretty much where they are. I think win gets them into the playoffs, gets them into the Champions Cup for next year. Both of those would be massive achievements, and then they're in complete bonus territory after that for the playoffs and the rest of their season. So again, massive game for both teams. Munster have been in poor form recently, 3 wins from their last 7, but of those, like looking at those wins, some of them kind of papered over cracks as well. Lions have won 6 of the last 7 and, just defeat the Leinster last week, and they would have been on for a perfect 7. So they would have been the undisputed form team in the league. So, a massive task, I think, ahead for Munster in this game, honestly, to come out with a win. But Munster in their sequence, so they lost to Glasgow, then they beat Zebre, lost to the Sharks, lost to the Bulls. They beat a Benetton team that looked like they were already on holiday, although Benetton came back the next week and beat Leinster. So, just remember that. But yeah, if you look at that Benetton performance, they were way off. Then they beat an Ulster team that was completely changed to rest players for their Challenge Cup semi-final. And then they lost against a Connacht team, lost abjectly against a Connacht team last week. So that's the worrying result for me, I think. Lions then, in their sequence, so win against the Sharks, then the Stormers, then Edinburgh, then Dragons, then Glasgow, and then Connacht. And you look at that and you see a lot of teams near the top of the table that they've beaten that have been in good form recently as well. And then that loss against Leinster. Obviously, if they had beaten Leinster, it would have been guaranteed qualification already. But I do feel that they are going to qualify whether it's going to be with a win or a losing bonus point or wherever, or just Connacht not winning themselves or one of the other teams below them. Because again, if Cardiff, Ulster or Connacht lose, the Emirates Lions already qualified. So I don't know why. Just looking at there, I'm looking at Super Brew. They're still calling the Emirates Lions. Obviously, they're the whatever stupid one they have now, the Fidelity Secure Drive Lions. They're no longer the Emirates Lions. But yeah, it's likely that one of those teams below them are going to lose anyway, so they'll know why we come to this game if they qualified or not, and maybe that's going to, lessen their intensity, as it were. Obviously, if they come into this game knowing they have to win to qualify, it will G them up. But if they know that they're absolutely guaranteed a top 8 finish and probably a top 6 or 7 finish, that it takes a little bit of edge away from them. But the fact they're a team that have won 6 of the last 7, and winning is a habit, and they're in so much of a habit to win. Head says the Lions are going to win this one, and maybe because of that, it looks like it could be between Munster and Cardiff to miss out on the playoffs, and it would then depend on losing bonus points between in those 2 games that those 2 teams are playing. So Cardiff versus the Stormers and Munster in this game against the Lions. And again, you don't really want to be looking, in a scenario where you're looking for a loser's bonus point to secure your position. You want to be confident. You want to be going for a win. And I think Munster will go for a win. It's just about, can they get the performances out of their players, because they just haven't been doing it recently, and you kind of worry about them as well because of that. That they've been up and down a bit too much and not really showing fight at crucial times in games as well. But again, head says Lions, but heart says Munster, and I'm going to be stupid and I'm going to go for a Munster win in that one. But I think if Munster do win, both teams still qualify for the playoffs. Okay, so those are my predictions. Let me know what you think, especially who do you think is going to be that unlucky team that misses out on the top 8?